I have the pleasure of introducing this session's panel, in particular our moderator, Mark Richardson here. Thank you. I like that enthusiasm. Thank you so much. Mark is a professional speaker with a wealth of experience in strategic partnerships, talent acquisition, and workforce diversity. He transitioned from his position as Vice President of Strategic Partnerships at the Urban League of Greater Madison in 2013 to start his own consulting company called Unfinished Business, which helps professionals and organizations navigate career transitions and acquire diverse talent. Mark has also served in various leadership roles in the public and private sectors, including the Wisconsin Department of Commerce, the Wisconsin Department of Tourism, and Charter Communications. He is known for his expertise in corporate fund development, work readiness, training programs, and workforce diversity and leadership summits. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to our moderator, Mark Richardson, everybody.
All right. How you guys doing? We good? I think Brian made some stuff up in that, and I'm going to keep it. So thank you, Brian. It's great being here. Let me turn my tech on. It's great being here. It's kind of like old home week for me. As you guys know, this event is near and dear to my heart. And so when I got the call that said, hey, might you want to moderate a panel? I said, absolutely, I'm there. And then I heard who the panelists were, and I said, when do we start? Right? So I want to get this going. I'm going to introduce our panelists. I'm going to read their bios. So save your applause for one huge applause at the end. How about we do that? Right? And then we'll light this candle. Erin Hillson is the Director of Human Resources for the City of Madison. She thrives in an environment devoted to public service and has been with the city for approximately 25 years. Erin has a bachelor's degree in psychology, which is a real help in HR, from UW-Madison, and a graduate degree in HR in human resources and labor relations from UWM. While Erin could share more about her family, 4 kids, 2 dogs, wow, 4 kids, 2 dogs, she would rather point you to the City of Madison's job page and the plethora of job opportunities. So welcome, Erin. Can't wait to hear from you today. Grace Fernando. Grace is a diversity, equity, and inclusion manager at UW Credit Union, where she focuses on building an inclusive culture. The goal, which I love your breakout of this, the goal is to create a workplace where everyone is valued, accepted, and empowered to do their best so they can express themselves fully, contribute in meaningful ways, and advance professionally. In addition to being a certified diversity professional, Grace is also an I Am Remarkable facilitator. I don't know about that, but I want to learn about that. She's grateful for the program, and that dovetails nicely into professional skill sets, and helps her uplift others and encourage them to embrace and share their accomplishments. When things in life get tough, her go-to is chocolate. Lots of chocolate. Anybody with her on that? Wow, we got to get some chocolate in here. Note for next year. Grace, welcome. Angela Arrington is currently a corporate counsel and manager at Alliant Energy, one of the major sponsors of this event. She handles a diverse array of practice areas that include employment law, litigation, commercial contracts, content and records management, compliance and governance. She pretty much does it all. Angela also holds critical roles with the company by serving as the lead legal counsel for crisis management. We haven't had any crises lately, have we? No. Yeah. Angela has significant experience in government relations, political law, and policy matters. Over the years, Attorney Arrington has served as a trusted legal advisor to various constituencies on matters and has garnered a reputation for making sound, successful legal decisions. Angela believes that justice must always have a front row seat. To place it anywhere else will lead to a poor result, even if the case is won. I think that's cool. Angela graduated with honors from Tuskegee University and received a Bachelor's of Arts in both English and poli-sci. She's also a graduate of Indiana University, the Maurer School of Law, getting her JD there. Angela's passions beyond work include family, travel, and the next learning opportunity. Welcome. And last but not least, Clara Tavarez. Clara is a talent acquisition specialist at ProMega with over 14 years of experience in HR. She's worked with public and private sector organizations ranging from nonprofits to global corps, helping them build stronger, more inclusive workplaces through talent acquisition, talent development, benefits, diversity, equity, inclusion. But Clara's expertise go beyond just HR. She's also worked in education in the areas of managing bilingual Spanish community-based programs for elementary-age children. Her diverse experiences have given her a unique perspective on creating inclusive work environments and the value of cross-cultural communication. As a woman of color, an immigrant, and a mother of a neurodivergent child, Clara knows firsthand the importance of fostering an inclusive workplace. Her passion for inclusion stems from her personal experiences, and she's dedicated her career to ensuring that everyone feels valued and respected in the workplace. Clara was born and raised in the Dominican Republic and has been living in Wisconsin for over 23 years. When she's not at work, she's spending time with her husband, her 2 daughters, and her 2 dogs. We've got a dog thing going on here. Dog owners? Or maybe who owns the dogs, and do the dogs own you? Yeah, that's right. She also loves staying active and by running and cycling and unwinding some of those good old-fashioned Netflix binges. So welcome our panel, one and all. This is a good crowd. They follow directions and everything. So anybody looking for talent at their org? Yeah. Anybody having a hard time finding it? Should have been the same number of hands, for sure, right? So we're going to talk about this world we're in where unemployment is at an all-time low, talent mobility is at an all-time high, and what are we doing to attract and retain the talent we have, and how do we get the most out of that talent? I heard some things in our bios that will flesh that out. So first thing we're going to talk about is this pre and post. Everything's marked by the last 3 years, right? So like pre-COVID, here's what we did. Post-COVID, here's what we do. And so we're going to talk about the acquisition piece, and then we'll slide into the retention piece. So let me start with the HR professionals on the end. So what are we seeing? What are we feeling? What are we doing differently today than we were doing 3 years ago? I'll start with Erin, and we'll work our way down.
Thank you. Nothing like going first, right? Mm-hmm. I think so. One of the things that we've seen a gigantic shift in has been sort of the needed pace of hiring and the willingness of folks to go elsewhere if they're not satisfied with, whatever the work environment is, not satisfied with their supervisors, not satisfied with their compensation or benefits. And so you can't rely on some of the sort of old standards that you had, whether it's, great wages, great benefits, to attract and retain folks. You have to really be willing to adjust and be flexible and get folks in the door right away. It seems like the second you have someone sort of on the hook, they're on 3 other hooks, right? And you have to be willing to do what it takes to get them in and help them become a part of that work culture right off the bat, or they're willing to go elsewhere. It used to be years ago, there was a sort of reticence to leaving the job that you're in and, job hopping, right? Going from one job to another job that works for you to another job that works for you. And that's not there anymore, right? There's nothing really keeping folks committed to one particular job if it's not meeting their needs. And so we have to really be focused on that flexibility. So just one thing I think we've really noticed.
Okay, great. To Clara, because she's in that same space.
Yes. Thank you for coming to this one. So I would say I would echo everything that Erin said in terms of being flexible in the work environment and how workers are going for the opportunities that fit their unique needs rather than, having to adjust to a work environment because they have options. I think we heard that before. I think the other piece of that is coming out of a pandemic, I think we still have that sense of like coming back to the workplace and belonging, right? So what are we doing to make sure that not only we are hiring people and have a strong hiring initiative, but what are you doing to keep your people interested and for them to stick around? So a lot of that has made employers put a lot more focus on that retention piece as well. And not only because it's a tight job market, but just from the sense of leveraging what you have internally. So what are you doing to make sure that the high potential employees that you have in-house are having the opportunity to get into those positions that have the need now? And so that's one thing I would add.
Very cool. You notice I didn't say diverse candidates or diverse employees, right? You notice I just said talent. Because this work, DEI work, should never run counter to the big picture, which is you need talent, generally speaking. So what we're doing to and for talent, if it's talent of a diverse nature, it's even more important, right? And so that's why we didn't sort of pigeonhole that answer, because we'll get into the DEI thing in just a moment. What questions, and this is for anybody in the panel, because we've got some experts in the DEI space, we've got some experts in labor law and HR, and we've got some experts in talent acquisition. What are we getting asked about today that we didn't maybe get asked about pre-COVID, pre-George Floyd, pre this surge of consciousness? And anybody can field this one to start with. What are we getting asked today that we weren't getting asked a little while ago? See, I'm testing you guys. Yeah, Grace, take it.
All right. I think one of the big things, Mark, is that people want to know what's in it for them. They want to know what impact they're making and how the work that they're doing is contributing to the organization and the values of the organization. What they want to know is this an organization that resonates with me and what I value and what I believe in? So, if you don't have CSR efforts, if things like sustainability and, being out there in the community and contributing to the communities where you are, these are the things that folks are looking for, especially the younger folks.
Yeah, right on. Anybody else want to layer on?
I can take it too. I would also say accountability is huge in the workplace right now in a way that it's not like it was not pre-pandemic, but it's a lot more upfront. And what I mean by that is that employees are expecting psychologically safe as well as physically safe workplaces. We talk a lot about the physical safety. Like most people know, okay, your workplace has to be compliant ergonomically. The desk has to be a certain way, or your chair has to be a certain way, computer systems or technology. We think of those things really quick. With physical safety, obviously, physical safety in workplaces now where there's really a hyper focus, rightfully so, on violence not being in the workplace and things like that. But there's another piece of this about psychological safety that really got unlocked, I think, with the pandemic, because people realized that working from home created a space of safety, especially for people of color and other diverse groups, where you didn't have to worry about microaggressions. The Teams and the WebEx and the Zoom or whatever platform you were on kind of blocked that. You didn't have to worry about underhanded comments or not being included, because all of that kind of dissipated somewhat during the time that people were working from home. And so there was this angst. And Mark and I, we had a conversation about this in a different space where there was angst about returning to the workplace. And it was as if employers, and in particular human resources professionals, didn't know where to start because nobody wanted to have the honest conversation that there were issues in the workplace with psychological safety.
To begin with.
To begin with. And so at Alliant Energy, we started having those conversations because I raised it and said, it's not just about people not wanting to come back because we want to be in our leggings or our PJs, I'm telling on myself when I say that, and work from home. That was not the only piece of it. There was a lot more going on with why people, even the generational, and I know we'll get into that, there were some generational differences. Definitely people of color and the issues that have been experienced in the workplace with again, going back to microaggressions and things where people were not feeling like they belonged. They weren't feeling like they were included. And so in order to come back into the workplace, there was going to have to be some accountability, and there was going to have to be, the hard conversations, and then an acknowledgement that, yes, our workplaces need work for where we are now, where people are not just going to sit in spaces and constantly be under a psychological duress, because that's what folks were literally under. There's a lot of stress that can be incurred at a workplace when it is not psychologically healthy. We think of the physical, we got that down to a certain extent, at least most places do, but we just don't talk enough about the psychological aspects of it. And so that's what was very helpful, I think, is that employers have had to be a lot more accountable about what they're doing in their workspaces, like what programs are available for wellness, where if someone has a complaint, not just that it's going into the HR folder and there's just like a sham of an investigation, but there's follow through and that there's follow up, that there's training that deals with these issues that have always been in the workplace, to be honest. But when people got out of that office and got some peace, they were like, if I come back in there, it's got to be different. And that includes even working from home. People were like, hey, even with me working from home, because things can happen in the work from home or work remotely atmosphere as well, but there was just an accountability where we've had to roll up our sleeves as, employment labor professionals and really do that work. And I do think that's been excellent.
Thank you for that. Yeah, right on. Give it up. Because she's being real now, right? And thank you for that honesty, right? Because I don't know. When you get back to the shop, you may need to talk. Well, no, they know what's up. That they know you're here. So, anybody else seeing some of the same things? And if so, can you tell us a little bit about it? And do you see a difference between your employees of diverse backgrounds or from within diverse communities versus the majority group of employees? Anybody?
Not to answer directly that second piece, but yes, we're absolutely seeing all of the things that Angela talks about. And I would just tag it to one of the points that was made in the keynote earlier about like recruitment efforts and then hiring efforts, right? And the importance of sort of that direct supervisory accountability. One of the things that is even a little more challenging, I think, post-COVID, is getting a handle on sort of the impacts of direct supervisors, direct individuals in the workplace who are causing some of that lack of psychological safety, and then making sure that you're really addressing it. And it can be really easy to have all sorts of initiatives sort of at an HR level or an organizational level or all kinds of HR folders that help us think that we're on track when someone's experiencing something in the workplace that is damaging to them every single day, that is really making it so hard for them to want to stay in that workforce. And when it's as easy as it is to leave right now, they're not going to stay. Right.
That's the new thing, right? That's the new variable. It's like, I can be out of here. Well, let's talk about
That's okay.
well, let's talk about ERGs, because I think ERGs.
That's where I was going, actually.
Perfect. I read Clara's mind. ERGs can be a way to field, to address, to have these things bubble up through. So, employee resource groups. For those of you not playing the bingo game, the acronym bingo game, can you tell us a little bit about maybe at Promega how you guys are using ERGs, Clara, and then we'll open it up to the group.
Oh, he said to tell him about Promega specifically.
Well,
All right.
they got your bio. They know where you're from.
Yes, so Promega's DEI program is kind of on the newer side in terms of it being formalized. I think the culture has been a lot about being welcoming and making sure that, differences are celebrated, but now we're putting kind of like the formal stamp of like the DEI program, right? So we recently hired our DEI program manager, and he's doing a fantastic job at making sure that the diverse group of employees, affinity groups, are starting to form and also continuing to do work within the organization. So part of what we see is that you had asked about what specifically are maybe differences that the diverse employees or candidates are looking for. And I think this applies to everyone, but there's a component of that wellness and sense of belonging, right? That it's very important, and that's one of the questions that a lot of candidates will ask you right away. And that can look at many different components, because when we talk about wellness, people are looking at a more holistic way of doing wellness in a work environment. So financial wellness, mental health is a big one. And I think, again, because of the big events we've had, the pandemic, George Floyd, all of that, being able to deal with that while still being efficient at work, so that work-life balance, like what do you have in order to support a work environment where you can be productive while the world is falling apart, right?
Yeah.
So I think that that's where the ERGs are so important. They bring folks together, and we have real discussions about like what's going on in the world outside, and how does that impact your day-to-day. A lot of people want to come to work and feel like they can be their true selves, and that includes finding those affinity groups. So that has been a very key piece of what we have done in terms of DEI. So if you leave with something today, the answer, what are people looking for? ERGs is a big one. So that's a good one to take note on, because it really deals with a lot of the different components of that sense of belonging, and making sure that your folks are heard. And that's important. So
Yeah.
feedback that we get right away.
That's great. Grace, I know UW Credit Union is really big with ERGs, and when we were doing our prep call, you were going over some numbers, and I was shocked to learn, did you say over 50% of your employees are involved in an ERG or multiple ERGs?
That's close, Mark.
Okay.
Almost 50%.
All right.
So that's something that we're really proud of as well at the credit union. We have 6 ERGs, and they're in different stages of development. Some are a little more established than others. But to Clara's point, absolutely. It's one way that you can help your folks build community, build those affiliations. It's a great way for folks to network, especially those who are new to the organization. You talk about hiring, you talk about onboarding, you talk about retention. This is a great way to do it. And we actually talk about our ERGs in our new employee orientation. We have a panel come up from our ERGs every single month and talk about, here's what we do, here's how you get involved, here are the expectations of membership, and here's why we do it, here's what we've gotten out of it. So, we get feedback that's probably one of the favorite things that people get to experience out of new employee orientation. So it means something to folks. And, on the flip side, there is also benefit to the business. We talk about coming back to the bottom line. You have engaged employees who feel like they belong. They're going to be able to contribute more. They feel like they're part of the organization and they know where they're heading. It's a way for them to also contribute to the business. Our ERGs have been involved in initiatives. They bring ideas up. Hey, what about, for example, ITIN lending. Folks who didn't have Social Security numbers, we weren't able to do things for them before. And one of the things that our Latinx group brought up was, well, can we do something about that? Well, yes, we did. So that is something tangible that your groups can bring to the organization. And also, we use it as informal leadership development opportunities. So the folks who are leading our ERGs, we intentionally help them grow in those roles within the organization and help them exercise and build skills and capabilities that they may not have in their everyday jobs.
Love it. Just for a show of hands out in the audience, where you work, your workplace, how many people have ERGs or affinity groups? Okay. All right. And during our prep call, it was funny, every one of your organizations has them. They may be on differing life cycles, right? Have you been involved? Has anybody been involved with creating them? And if you have, can you share with this group some of the things to look for, some of the things to be on the lookout for, and to sort of get themselves up and running? No? Oh, anyone?
I mean, I can
Bueller?
take it.
Angela, why don't you take that one, and then we'll head that way.
I was going to say, I have been involved with, I guess, the reassessment, which has kind of led to the creation of, ERGs. We have 7 currently at Alliant Energy, and there's this discussion happening right now around more, because what's happened, again, during the pandemic, we're reassessing. We're learning that there might need to be additional spaces for a variety of reasons. And we're also looking at what we already have and what's working, what's not working. And I think that a really big piece of the assessment that we always do with the ERGs is, what is the expected need or needs to be met of your ERG? So if there is an ERG that is focused on women, if there is an ERG that is multicultural, if there is an ERG that is focused on young professionals or talent entering into, like, for instance, I work for Alliant Energy, so we may have people entering into the space that have never worked in the utility space before. It is a very vast space, and many of the jobs, the learning curve is super duper steep, and you're just kind of like just dealing with it. And I was one of those people where I had legal experience in a variety of areas, but I had never worked, in the utility space. And so, long story really short, I'm glad that there's a focus now on an ERG where that might be able to cultivate talent, because there's a lot that can happen in that space where people can be retained, where they don't feel so overwhelmed, because the pace can move really fast in jobs. I'm quite sure with all of our jobs, probably in here, the pace just takes off, and there might not be the time to really, dare I say, slow down, or we think there's not the time to slow down and kind of talk through things. But it's nice when people can kind of get in a space and they can talk wherever that is. We really try to, keep the hands off, like where there's so much micromanagement of the ERGs. I do like at Alliant, another, I think, critical piece for creativity around an ERG is that it really helps when the buy-in from the executive level or the higher level is like literally at the table, and they're not just at a sponsor, but they're coming to the meetings, because that was something that was very important at Alliant Energy during the whole George Floyd situation, after the unfortunate murder of George Floyd, is that it was good that you had executive leadership that was like, okay, let's have a conversation with the staff that's involved with these ERGs, and in particular, the multicultural ERG. And even out of that, there were some other spaces that started getting created, because that's another thing that can happen, is that other spaces can get created. It doesn't have to be heavily regulated by the employer.
Right.
Allow people to speak freely. Allow them to voice what they need to voice without a fear of retaliation, which gets us into some legal issues. But this is a place where I'll stay away from like getting too heavily legalese, but just to say that it helps that the ERGs, yes, are following compliance in the sense that you're not closing people off. If you say it's a multicultural space, allow it to truly be multicultural and allow people to come into that space. If there are affinity groups, I know that there have been discussions of, well, what about groups for, addressing, for instance, white affinity and how they can get better and quote unquote, all these different thoughts around that. If that's going to be the space, it still has to have some level of structure to it. Again, what is the need? What is the purpose? But at the same time, anybody can join that space. And because that's something that comes up with the ERGs, please make sure they're welcoming.
Yeah, so that we are truly being inclusive.
Yes, being truly
not
inclusive
exclusive
and belonging.
within an organization.
Yeah.
And that's real. Grace, ERGs, for those folks who don't have them or are thinking about expanding, some do's, some don'ts, some things that you would recommend they look out for.
That's a great question. I think the first one would be, to build on what you said, Angela, look at the data. Look at your folks, look at what your business needs are, look at what your folks need, and look at and listen to what your folks are telling you. That's the first thing that you should do, and think about sustainability. So we have 6 ERGs at the credit union. We have about 900 employees. So sustainability is important. Do you have the folks who are interested, able, and willing to lead these groups, to keep them going, to create engagement? So one of the things that we're looking at is encouraging the 6 ERGs that we have to work together and collaborate more, to work smarter. How do you do things together that benefit folks, while keeping spaces for the things that you want for your communities? So it doesn't have to be one or the other, it can be all. Generally things are open to everyone at the credit union, unless there's certain things which, you gotta have some perks for membership, right? So certain things are open just to members. So look at those things, and then look at having templates or processes, things that'll help. So, make it easy to start something if that's what you want, and make sure that you have some kind of governance going on. If it's important to your organization that you have some kind of rules and guidelines for these folks, it's always easier to have a framework to work within as well, something to start from.
And that'll help sustain it as well.
Exactly. Make sure you have all the expectations. How many hours can folks devote to this? Are they going to be paid hours? No. What about stuff that happens outside of official work hours? Just kind of sticky things like that.
Yeah, it's the devil's in the details, right?
Exactly.
And so are the angels. And that's what happens when you get some momentum in this work. I was explaining to somebody that when you do this work and you're serious about this work, at first it feels like you are pushing and pushing and pushing, and against a lot of pushback sometimes. But there's a point in this work in which it shifts and it starts to pull you. That momentum you're getting because of you're activating these employees, and you're getting sides of them and you're getting energy from them that you never knew was there. Then it's working for you, right? So you got to be committed to get to that point. Can't be like, oh, this is too much. I knew we shouldn't have started this. No, it's worth the payback. It's funny because you've got, as far as how long your ERGs have been in place, this is almost descending. Clara, I know you guys have been at it for a couple of years, and then I know the city's on board as well. Anything to add to what these ladies said?
So, I want to be realistic because I do want to be realistic because I know some organizations may not have the ability to form those affinity groups, or they may be smaller. So I would say, I think the way that we started things would apply to any organization really, and it's based on feedback, right? Listening sessions. So we had focus groups with our employees, and I think you can do this at any level. We're a big corporation, so we do have 5 groups. They've evolved from what people have said that they wanted out of those listening sessions. But when you're getting ready to launch these ERGs, it's also important to think about the fact that you're going to be constantly receiving feedback, and you want to ask for feedback and ask for it often. And how do you address all of that? So that's the other component of being prepared to launch an ERG initiative. And I think it's a very big one because it does relate to what we're talking about, the generational workforce and what that looks like now, right? Like my generation, millennials, and Gen Zers, we're really used to giving our feedback and getting things right away taken care of. A lot of it has to be almost automatic. So part of that is you bring people together, you bring voices together. There's a lot of great ideas happening, and how do you address that? So a little bit of what Grace was talking about, like what are the expectations and what's going to happen when we bring forward an idea? Do we have an executive sponsor that can take it further? And how are we going to allocate resources to making sure that whatever comes out of these groups, it's really becoming actionable stuff for our company, right? So that's another piece, I think.
Yeah, the first one to say resources. I love that, we dedicate those resources to them, and not just money, but time. Time is key. What about the city, Erin? And then Clara said something about generational. We want to get into this whole generational diversity amongst, because I saw some faces when she said millennial. She's a millennial. I saw some boomers out there wrinkle their noses up. So we're going to talk about that. Erin, what about the city as it relates to ERGs? Then we'll talk about generational diversity.
So I think they've really shared kind of everything you probably need to be thinking about. I would just reinforce a couple of comments that they made. I think Angela talked a little bit about how you need to make sure that you're not heavily regulating them, heavily managing them, but that you're heavily supporting them on the other end, right? That's providing them with resources, making sure that it's, I think Angela's organization, or maybe it was Grace who mentioned, using them as vehicles for personal growth and development, leadership development for the folks that support those. And then I also, on the other end, want to make sure we're thinking about the feedback that we do get out of those ERGs, that we're taking that feedback seriously. The last thing you want is to sort of empower folks to have voice. People come to organizations because they want to get by, they want to get ahead, they want to have a voice. And if that voice is ignored, the second they have like a space where there's psychological safety to provide it, it absolutely kills the relationship. And so really making sure to take seriously what comes out of those employee resource groups.
It's one thing to ask for feedback. It's another thing to accept it, right? And then it's another thing on top of that to act on it. And so it's really, it's a change in the paradigm from what the old timers, and I count myself among them, you see these gray hairs. Some would say it's the tail wagging the dog. I don't think that's necessarily the case, but what it is it's allowing employees to make more of the decisions than you have to this point. And that's a big deal. That's a big shift for in sort of a traditional old school organization or company to allow employees to call some of the shots. But it's also a great way to keep employees. It's a great way to attract employees. It's a great way to power your businesses. And let's talk about some of these youngsters, shall we? So we talk about some of these youngsters. And so first and foremost, for those of you with the 20-somethings, they're not millennials. I think some of us that are old think everybody beyond a certain point are millennials. And we blame everything on the millennials. So generationally speaking, the 20-somethings aren't millennials anymore. They're past it, right? They're over it. But what we not by much, but you know, the whole Gen Zs and what we do have and what we know we have is at least 4 generations in the workplace and that's not been the case before. Now, and you could even, depending on what numbers you're drawing, you could say 5. But we've got people who couldn't retire because retirements got wiped out, so they had to stick around, right? We've got young people that are entering the workforce, and we got very different expectations for those generations of what they should expect. Let's talk about generations. Let's talk about the bridges to those generations and how that could be helpful. Is anybody seeing almost like oil and water, the line between sort of the old school and the new school folks, which is not to call out your organization for being bad. It's to say, if you're seeing it, what are you seeing and how is it showing up? Anybody?
I think boomers secretly love Gen Zers.
Ooh, do tell.
I was just saying that because let's be real, like you're approaching retirement. You wish you had unlimited PTO to deal with having to plan for all of that and, you know, just get a feel of it and take it slow with the transition, right? So I feel like very much we get into this conversation of like generational differences, and in the end we're all looking for the same thing because that hierarchy of needs is not going to change. We all want really competitive retirement programs. We want really competitive benefits. Even if you're like the younger crowd, like, oh no, I don't have to worry about benefits because I'm on my mom's plan. I get that sometimes. I'm like, oh, you do. So it's coming up, right? So part of that conversation and people having all that access to information too, that then they realize shortly after I have that conversation with them, oh yeah. And there's even TikToks that will tell you how to deal with these things, right? So I think that more than seeing it as like, oh, there's differences for every group, going back to what is talent looking for, ask them. Just ask them, ask for feedback constantly, and again, ERGs. Why? Because those groups, or affinity groups, right, are going to have a mix of employees of different backgrounds, tenures with the organization, all of that, and with some common goals and common things that they want to see change in the organization, perhaps. So I think that that's where that's also another advantage of having affinity groups. But even if you had a smaller organization, going back to like the feedback channels and communication being strong, and this is where the ERGs are a plus too, because they are constant communication with your folks. If you have those executive sponsors coming to meetings and all of that, and if there's that constant getting together and talking about real issues, right? I think that's where I was going, just the feedback and asking. Even if you don't have a big organization with ERGs, you want to ask your new hires, you want to, no matter what age, right? Your new hires, your people retiring, what's keeping you here today? What would you like to see? What can we do differently? And ask them many different points in time during their tenure. So I think we all love each other, and we just, yeah. And, oh, yeah, I have more, but maybe let's see what other people have.
All right. I love Clara's she's going rogue. She's taking over. She's like, Angela, you're not getting in this.
It's not millennials' fault.
It's all good. That's what we're here for. We're here to learn from each other. Anybody else, ideas about our generations and what we see, the differences and the similarities we see?
I can add to some of that, and I have a couple things I wanted to say, and thank you, Clara, for that. The first is expectations and speed. Your younger generations are gonna be the impatient ones. What can you do for me? How do I get promoted tomorrow? I started today. You're gonna hear things like that, so be prepared for that, and leverage whatever you can. So figure out what you need in your organization. and how you can meet their needs too, so that it's a win-win. And I think that kind of goes without saying, but you can use, to Clara's point, programs like your ERGs. Look for external opportunities that you may not have in-house. So if you are part of a chamber, if you are a member of organizations, look for those opportunities to help your folks develop and grow. That's one of the things that we do at the credit union. And then the other thing is, just a quick story here. So we were doing a presentation of our DEI strategy to some of our leaders a while ago, and somebody said, how do you get to know people without talking to them? So it took me a minute to kind of take that in, but I think what that said to me is that people really want to know, they want to understand, and they're not quite sure what to say or what questions to ask or how you go about that. And that's one of the things that we're hearing from some of our leaders as well at the credit union. What are some of the tools and the resources that we have? So that's one of the reasons why focusing on your leadership team is also a great thing to do, because for us, that's how we are building our culture and making sure that folks are feeling included and belonging. Because we all know this, right? The leader sets the tone for the department, for the team, for the organization. So that's why, our focus too is on our leaders. So it's, top down, bottom up, and working it from both ends.
Love it. It goes to what Erin was saying earlier. When you have a manager or a supervisor, you don't know if that supervisor is doing it for you or doing it to you, right? And it's the people leaders that have to get good at this. The people leaders are it's a must. You had some things during our prep call about Gen X, right? Any Gen Xers in the room? Anybody know that they're a Gen Xer? Yeah, we're like the forgotten group, right? So we've got this push, we've got this surge of sort of the tech folks coming in, right? That grew up with a phone in their hand and understanding every piece of tech ever made, and then we have the boomers who are like, maybe I can get out of here without learning that, right? And then you got the Gen X folks that are in the middle. Tell me what your thoughts were about that middle swath.
What's funny about Gen X is that I think that, and that's my generation, I'm a proud Gen Xer, we just do it. And I think that, we do it, we don't do it for the attention, we don't do it for the likes, we do it because it's living. And that's what's happening in the space of employment right now, is that the new management styles that are being adapted or that are being adopted, that are being created, that are being cultivated, a lot of that is happening for what I consider our generation to be the bridge generation. Because at the end of the day, to the points that have been said by every panelist on here, everybody wants the same thing. People want the wellness. People want peace on the job. People want good pay with benefits. People want flexibility. Folks want the employer to not just see them as another number and to actually care about what their contributions are and their value in a job. So that's across the generations. And so that's what's helpful when you have an understanding of what it was like, where it was like, okay, your hours were 8 to 4. There was no work from home at one point in time. That was absolutely not a thing pre-pandemic. I know in previous jobs, there were other people that were working from home just like one day a week, and that seemed like heaven. I was like, wow, you get to work from home? And then when I went over to Alliant, we had a percentage of how much you could work from home. I thought that was nice because, again, I had come from a space where we couldn't at all. But then the people in the room that were talking about work from home and how to make it work pre-pandemic happened to be the Xers. Yes, there were boomers in the room, and boomers were looking at it, truthfully, a little bit more rigid. But it was kind of like, there's a way to do this. And then when you bring the other generations in that are younger, that are millennial, and that are Gen Zers, it's like everybody has great ideas about how this can work. And so I think that, one of the biggest things, back to people leadership, is that it's very helpful when we come into the room, and we let it go about the generations and the different divides, because I tell my niece and nephews who are Gen Z, millennial, like, I tell them there was a day and time that people were not identified by their generation. You were just a person. Like, you were Angela, my name, and then whomever else. You weren't identified like, all because you do something that makes you a millennial, because no disrespect to any of the young people in the room, nothing is new. You just on a different platform doing it. I kid you not. Right, okay, thank you. Clap on it. It's not that new, I promise you. It was funny because I remember Colin Powell did a selfie years ago. Colin Powell did a beautiful selfie, and he did it, you know, when he was a young man. Selfies have been out, no disrespect to anybody. You know, people have been doing, you know, or people, you know, just talking about different ways of going about communication, to the point that you brought up about just like how to communicate silently. There was something about being modest and silent. That's not new. And it's not to put anybody down. It's just to say, hey, we're more alike than we realize. We're just born at different times.
Right.
You wouldn't get here without the previous generation,
right.
And we're not moving forward without the younger ones.
Right.
So it's just a matter of how we, you know, it's a matter of how we come in the room and in the space with great ideas. And I think the ERGs are an excellent. I'm so glad that was brought up about there's feedback that has come out of those ERGs, because the ERGs have actually attracted people from different generations.
Right.
And then people just get to talking and having thoughts. And it's like, okay, maybe that wasn't as much of an issue when someone started their job 20 years ago, but it is an issue now. And what do we do about it? And how do we do it? And that's the best place to get feedback, instead of doing some blind survey. Mm-hmm. Someone's telling you to your face, this is how, or sometimes to your face,
right.
You know, this is how you advance and get that. And that's how we've been able to attract talent across the board, when we heard it matters to actually cultivate the ERGs.
Right. Back to that acquisition and,
exactly.
And that retention.
And to do all of that. So I just wanted to share about how, you know, when it comes to the management piece, there's a lot of work that's getting done by all of the generations. And it's been very helpful, I think, for us to be in spaces like this and to talk, because that's what's missing, is that we're kind of in silos at times, and we're thinking, well, oh, it's just 2 generations here, or even sometimes just 1, and you'd be amazed what you can learn, the wisdom that can be in the room, because you're not going to get everything overnight. So don't stress yourself. You just not.
Well, but you want it overnight.
You might
want
want
it
it,
overnight.
but you would be amazed at what happens with process and planning that can get you something much better, and having that wisdom in the room of the older generations can help, but also having the younger generation be like, but we can get there maybe with this kind of technology and all of this that was given somewhat by Gen X.
Right, right. So she says, you're not your generation, but Gen X gave you that technology. So when it helps, you know. So did we touch on some of the stuff? I know that end of the table had some things. I feel like I'm going against each other. It's a versus thing.
No. I just wanted to mention too, mentorship. That, I mean, we're just at the beginning stages of developing a mentorship program, but mentorship is that bridge, right? That bridge between, you know, all of the things that were already done by someone else and all of the things that folks need to see today. And I think it was, I can't remember who mentioned the sort of immediate need that especially this newer generation has for growth and professional development. And you know, that's not going to go away. That's only going to get stronger and stronger all the time. And the folks who have been here a while, the Gen Xers, the boomers, are great folks to provide some of that mentorship, right? They've had a whole career full of experiences that often can help provide insight and ideas and inspiration for some of the folks who are newer and looking for development and looking for movement and looking for, you know, exciting new opportunities. And so mentorship is one of those things that you don't want to forget as a potential means for sort of building that bridge.
Right on. Come back to Clara.
And I want to say thank you, Gen Xers. Thank you so much. I would agree that, you know, it's definitely the bridge generation. I don't want to take that from them. Actually, one of my biggest mentors was my first boss, and she is Gen Xer, and I love her to that, because a lot of what was important for her to, give me free realm to do things, and I think that that's important, right? Like, even when you're not going to promote someone who started yesterday, I think the keynote talked about hiring for potential, right? So make sure that you're maximizing people's potential no matter where they're at in their career, right? And that requires constant conversation and good leadership. And one other thing that I was going to say related to generations and all of that, like the leadership, the C-suite is looking a lot more mixed and diverse. Yes, it is. Right away, with having younger talent, being so ambitious. But just know that the younger folks are ambitious in different ways, so stay creative too, right? You have to think outside of the box, because they're not looking for a window office, they want to work from home. So we don't want the window office, or it's nice to have the technology and the perks, but constantly look at what you're offering as an employer that makes you have an advantage, right? And if you do something really good in specific space, keep doing it, and obviously look for other opportunities to grow, but make sure that people coming in the door know what's important for you and your organization. And hopefully one of those components is diversity, equity, and inclusion, and making sure that everyone feels welcome the moment that they walk in. So I think, I just think we all love each other. I'm going to say that again.
Sure do.
I love it. This is like church. You all are taking us to church, and we want to open this up for discussion and for questions from the floor. I do want to react to one thing you were saying, because I love when Angela, we know each other personally, professionally. I love when you go on your rants, right? Because I'm like, yes. She's like, we all want the same thing. We all want safety, and we want opportunity. And you know what? As it relates to this work, she's absolutely right. We do all want the same things. What's different generationally, and what's different as it relates to DE&I is everybody wants those, and now everybody expects to get those. That's the new wrinkle. This day and age, if you look around this room, everybody in this room doesn't just want the same things. Everybody in this room expects to get the same things. And is your organization prepared to deliver those opportunities for everyone? And if you're not today, I guess that's probably why you're here, because the other thing is we're all learning, right? As you guys know, I do a lot of this work with corporations and companies and organizations, and one thing I never do is indict someone for their generation. You are who you are. You came up when you came up. And so whether you're young and expect things tomorrow, or you got some seasoning and you never want anything to ever change, right? You came up when you came up. So if we're doing the work, that means we're all at the table and we all want to learn to get better. So that's what's up, and that's how this works. That's how this works. We could do this forever. Oh, okay, 11:43. Are we out at noon? Noon. Okay. Yes, Renee, come. There's a microphone in the hallway here in the aisle. You got because then
we can hear you.
Yeah, then you can be Donahue. You can be Phil Donahue and then run it to the next person.
Okay, I can do that. I see Mr. G behind me.
Right on.
So my question is about how you deliver, right? And I think in the past our companies were all about what we get done, and now it's how we do it, right? And that's what you're talking about is the how. And so it feels like there has to be less of the what to make more time for the how in terms of investing the resources. So I'm just wondering, as you sort of navigate that tension to make more time to deliver, how are you distorting those resources to make that happen?
Good question. And it wasn't at any one person, right? You're just any of the okay. How are you doing the how?
I think that we are having conversations with people about what they want constantly, direct managers, and also through the ERGs, like I mentioned, just because again, like if you keep the channel of communication open, you are going to find out who's interested in what and be more effective. So we not only have our ERGs, but we've had communities of belonging that preceded the ERGs working in very specific projects. So if you have specific goals that you think really need to be addressed first, that's where it starts. Just finding your priorities and being realistic with your priorities of, I have these 3 things that I want to do, because most of us are not going to do 10 different things. And then finding where to put it in the organization so that those people who really have that interest and can dedicate to it. And that's kind of like the how of like how to maximize.
Thank you. Anybody else have a different how?
Yeah, I think if it's important to you, you just have to make the time for it and devote the resources to it. So figure that out. What's important to you, and then what do you have to do to make it happen, and make sure that you do it. So for example, if development time is important to folks, we have areas in the credit union where, you set aside a day a quarter, and everybody does development. And it doesn't have to necessarily be job specific. It could be tangential, but you have that time. So, that's kind of a little example, Renee, but I think to your point, yeah, if it's important, you do it and you measure it and you see what impact it's having on you.
Great. Thank you. Anybody else? No? All right. Next question.
I'm Clark Gilman. I'm a retired executive, and I'm a proud boomer.
Yeah, but
And very thankful to you, young folks, for continuing to work. One of the things that I think that is sort of missed here, and I've been doing this for a very long time, is that in organizations, in you doing all these neat things at DEI, is the question is, what is the organizational culture? Because for people of color, when you work in an organization, there are a lot of unintended things that happen that you do not see, that are implied in things that are happening. Organizational culture is something that has to be inculcated and somehow shared. And so I don't know how that is working with your policies, but I have been in places where we've had people we brought along and they leave before they can complete their task because the company or the place they're working did not value something, and no one told you that it got missed. But to replace an individual once you've had them costs a lot of money and time, at an investment of time. So in this space that you're operating, how are you looking at the fact about what is the organizational culture? Because you have to define it. It has to be clear, and people need to know and they need to feel it. Because by the time some 10 people I did it, I could not recover. The person was gone because we had to now go to find someone else because we didn't identify what the problem was. So I just wanted to know if there's something that you could share with the group relative to that, because this is a very real thing that happens, but I don't know if people are talking about it as much.
thank you. That's real. So how do we see if that's happening? How do we prevent that from happening? How do we fix it if it does, when it does? Anyone?
I can take it. I think a big piece, and that's an excellent question around workplace culture, because that's ultimately what we are talking about, but the word needs to be called out about culture. It starts with the values of your company. What are they? I've worked in spaces we didn't have values that were known. You just knew if you violated the policies and procedures of the company that you may not have a job, or that you could at a minimum be disciplined, and get disciplined for not working. So a very quick point that I want to make, because I want to hear from the other panelists, is around define culture through your values. What are the values? And then that's got to be shared out to the company, and it has to be reflected in everything you do and say, and it has to be continuously kept or be monitored, through your policies and procedures, but, some of us have employee handbooks, we have codes of conduct, so all of that's policies and procedures. Okay, that's the documents, that's the legal stuff that we can look at, but truthfully, the check-ins of the ERGs are big. That's where you really gonna learn the culture. because that's where people talk. And they'll say, yeah, one of our core values at Alliant Energy is care for others. They don't have to be these very difficult to understand. That's another thing. They just need to be straightforward that we're a place where you do the right thing. You care for others. You act for tomorrow. Those kinds of things. Somebody will say, there wasn't care if I was just in a meeting where somebody felt like they could, and this isn't just an example of what could happen, where someone's like in a meeting and somebody, mispronounces somebody's name and they make a joke of it. That that can be a problem for somebody. That's not a care for others. So what's happening in terms of how is that being handled, and what is the training and teaching that can happen for that employee? Because it doesn't have to mean you're going to get disciplined for that. There can be some training. So it's about understanding, first of all, what are your values and how do they show up in your company?
Tie them to your values. Tie the work to the values of the company. Anybody else want to layer on that?
I would just mention, again, I think leader behaviors are absolutely crucial to work culture and the environment that folks experience. And so being in tune with what the expectations are and how people are or are not meeting behaviors at the leadership level of your organization is super critical. I think also I would just, on top of sort of hearing real qualitative information from ERGs, you also want to make sure that you're doing work culture assessments, surveys, and things like that to get at the data that supports some of those stories that you hear through those ERGs, and then making sure that you're actually creating action plans to address it. I mean, I've been with the organization I've been with for a really long time and watched us measure and measure and measure and measure and not act in response and not reinforce through, accountability and expectations of leaders for the behaviors that we're looking for.
Right. Good. Next question.
Good morning. My name is Torshika Maddox. We've talked a lot today about ERGs and the importance of them to the company. So I have a couple of questions really about how to set up a successful ERG. So I was wondering, and this is for anyone on the panel, if you could talk about how are they resourced? I mean, we talked about support, but some of that support comes by way of real tangible resources to implement initiatives that come out of these ERGs. And then I was hoping you could say a little bit more about how do the ideas or initiatives that are initiated in the ERGs make it to implementation? How does that information get from the group to leadership to implementation? And then could you talk a little bit about what the ERG leadership structure looks like? Is that something that is set up within the group? Is there some coordination with leadership? How does that continue to be turned over? Thank you.
That's a big question. Great question. Yeah. And it probably looks different in different places, but why don't one of you give us sort of the org structure around an ERG, and then maybe you guys can connect, because that's part of this thing, right? Connect with these ladies before you get out of here. Go ahead, Grace. Yeah.
Okay. That is a huge question. So how are they resourced? Anyone's open and eligible to join an ERG at the credit union, and they have budgets too. They have annual budgets. So, they have the ability to do things within their spaces. They also have executive sponsors who can help advise them, give them the organizational lay of the land. So, that's a great idea, and this is a great way to help implement that. And the executive sponsors are a great way for also to help the ERGs bring these ideas forward, and talk about it with their peers at the head of the organization. So that's some of the how our ideas implemented. They always have their executive sponsors that they can lean on. We also have support within the ERG, within the DEI team that I'm a part of. So we keep in really close contact with our ERGs as well. So that's another way that we help to support and resource our ERGs. And then as far as structure goes, it was a little different. A lot of our ERGs were grassroots built, so they came from the employees. This is what we're interested in, how we want to get it set up. And over the past year or so, we've been working to build something that's a little more consistent and sustainable. So, our model that we're working on now is we have a couple co-leads for each ERG, and they ideally would serve a 2-year term. So, and we have kind of a rollover, so one person rolls off, and we have continuity with the other person. So that's the model that we're building off of. And then, like I said, too, our DEI team works really closely with our ERGs and the leads to figure out what's going on, and kind of work through things and that kind of stuff.
It's that informal, leadership development opportunity, having a 2-year term and having someone be senior, someone be junior, have that person roll off, the next person steps up, so you get both continuity, the sustainability, but then you're actually teaching young, emerging folks, ascending folks to lead. And this is like a new language. This is going to be the language of the next decade. So I love that you asked that question, because the planning, I can see you're planning for this, right? We want to plan for the success around it. Do connect before you get out of here, because a wealth of information up here. Next question.
Real quick question. I'm with the ERGs at UW Health, but I don't know what our policy or guidelines are. Like, how long do you have to be an employee to join an ERG? Because thinking about hiring for potential and then wanting to retain talent, like maybe it's very important that employees are eligible earlier, because that might be like their safe zone and to keep them in the company. So I was wondering like what your organization's rules are.
Day one, actually. So part of what we do is, as an onboarding and orientation, we talk about our commitment to DEI, and that's a specific part of orientation, which is a great thing that came out of our program. And I think the message is being sent early on that here you have a voice and you can interact through these groups. And so we do it at orientation. I think that's very central to that whole dynamic of giving people the safe space and also letting them know that when they join the organization, these resources exist. So we do like highlight the ones that exist. How can people get in touch? We have a DEI program manager, all of that, so that they know they can be part of it right away.
Great question. Next question. We've got time for the next 2 questions.
I'll go quick. I'm Amanda. I'm millennial with the soul of a boomer, so put that out there. So I'm actually a marketer. We've talked a lot about today of recruitment, hiring, attract and retain, and I also see this middle ground of employer branding, and also kind of this parallel of sort of like the traditional customer journey, where you want to build awareness. If the talent knows about your company, you want to consider them, or they consider you. You want to have them pick you, and you want to make them loyal to your company so they stay. So just curious, recognizing sort of this middle ground between HR and hiring managers, the external and the internal. How are you working with your marketers and comms professionals to help recruit that talent, help tell that story, and also being strategic about it versus just, again, saying we have great benefits, we have a 401k, you want those points of differentiation. So just kind of want to explore that a little bit. It's sort of broad, and each company I know can be different, but again, the main thing is getting them not to only know about the job, but to apply for the job, say yes to an interview, and then actually show up for the interview. Yeah. So all that kind of, storytelling that goes in there.
Yeah, we'll have one person. Interest of time, Clara. You
I don't know if I can go again. But I will say I'm very proud of how we do this at Promega, because I feel like employer branding is its own thing that people are paying a lot of attention to it. So you don't want to be the best well-kept secret anymore. You want to be out there. So we do have our marketing department highlighting some of the things that we are doing with our ERGs. If you go to our Instagram page, you'll find there that there are stories about how employees celebrate, Cinco de Mayo, for instance. So yes, you want to be able to tell the story and give people a little bit more of an insight on what you're doing with diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that you're really truly committed to it because you're practicing it, right? So I feel like definitely involve your marketing, involve your corporate affairs, any community programs that you're helping, that all comes to be one part of, like, everything needs to have DEI. It has to be baked into all of your different programs, right? So that's how you do it. I think employer branding, yes, and highlight those ERGs, highlight the efforts that you're doing. Don't be a secret. Be out there with them.
Great. Thank you. Last question.
I'll be as quick as I can. So context, I sit on and have sat on several affinity group leadership executive boards, helped develop and create at least 2 of them that are successfully running. One of the biggest pain points that I'm seeing that clashes with the culture is supervisors. So we talk a lot about leadership, we talk a lot about diversity. So in the context of retention of supervisors that have track records in HR and the disposable nature of the individuals who are sliding through your organizations and out of your organizations because of the same individuals, how is that being addressed? Because I feel like that is the common pain point that keeps being addressed, regardless of your values, regardless of how you state them. It's now we're together, we have this collective room, and we're realizing, wow, we all have the same psychological damage from certain individuals that are being preserved in organizations. And so my question is, at the root of accountability, at the root of solving problems, listening to feedback, and actually having implementations, what are you doing to look at retaining these other set individuals? Because what I'm seeing is the ones that are leaving is the bulk of diversity, and word of mouth is how we get jobs and spread through trust. So what are you doing in that aspect? Curious.
Wow. Great question. Yeah. All right.
So I'll take that question real quick because that is a very that is a real issue for just about every employer. That sometimes you've got a quote unquote bad apple that's hanging around and harming all the other apples, right? So it goes back to accountability. When we know that there's an issue, we have to do something about that issue. And that's where the law kind of helps you do something about that issue, because what you cannot have is a workplace where people are feeling harmed. The law does not allow it. That's the quickest answer, and that's the justification for how that happens. And sometimes that even happens at higher level leadership. That's the higher up you go, that's where you really start to see, whoa, there was someone that was allowing, there's a higher level leader that was allowing the other leader to do what they were doing. And you have to have courage in that space. And I know that we're on a limited time, because these questions are great, by the way, and they're like mini sessions in my head. But it's kind of like, to that question, how do HR professionals feel empowered? Because there's that piece of it too, about how are you empowered to be able to do something about the bigger leader. And what it comes back to, when I have to advise on those issues, if that person is a liability, if you've got somebody that is allowing retaliatory behavior, harassment, threats, all of that is illegal. That is illegal in the workplace. It's illegal to mistreat somebody because of Of course, we know the big ones around disability and gender and race and things like that, but it is illegal that all because you have a personality difference, that you are assigning more work and allowing some, or you're limiting who can get overtime, who can't. It's all those little things that then become an issue. So the law helps you. That's the quickest way that I can say that.
And maybe an offline. We talk about the heart for the work. That's the stomach for the work. When the guy's got to go, it's got to go. So that's the stomach. Are we going to do that? Are we going to make that change? Let's hear it for our panel. I know we're in between lunch.